Okay, so you know how it is these days. Data. Data everywhere. Seriously, every business I talk to, it's like they're drowning in it.
Yeah, it's like that old problem of having all those files stuffed in the attic or the basement. You know it's valuable, but good luck finding anything specific when you need it.
Right, and nobody wants to spend their day wading through spreadsheets or chasing down outdated reports. We all want that clear, concise, reliable view of what's actually going on so we can, actually use the data to make smart decisions.
Precisely, and that's exactly where master data management, or MDM, comes into play.
MDM.
Mhm.
Okay, we hear that term thrown around a lot, but what are we really diving into today?
Well, we're lucky enough to have two really solid sources here. We've got a comprehensive book on master data management, really lays out the fundamentals, and then we've also got a super detailed guide on SAP master data governance, which, as you might guess, gets into the nitty-gritty of how MDM works in the SAP world.
Big picture, what's our mission for this deep dive? What are the key things we want to make sure our listeners really understand about MDM?
I think there are a few big questions we need to tackle. First, what exactly is MDM? Like, what does it actually mean in practice? Then, why is it so important, especially now? We hear so much buzz about digital transformation, and data is at the heart of that. So, how does MDM fit in?
Right, because it's got to be more than just a tech trend, right?
Absolutely. Then we'll get into some of the real world challenges of actually implementing MDM, because it sounds great in theory, a single source of truth for all your important data. But as I'm sure you can imagine, it's not always that simple.
Yeah, getting everyone on board, making the tech work, that's got to be a big undertaking.
Definitely. And then finally, we need to touch on some of the key architectural and security considerations. Because if you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, you better make sure that basket is secure and well designed.
Okay, so let's start with that first big question. What is MDM, really?
So, at its core, MDM is all about creating order out of chaos, essentially. It gives you a framework, the processes, and the technology to establish and maintain a data environment that you can truly rely on. Think of it as the master key that unlocks that hidden value within all that data you were talking about.
So instead of having customer data scattered across a dozen different systems, you have one single, reliable view of each customer.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that your data is authoritative, that it's accurate, and that it's consistent across the entire organization, and that it's secure, which is
Mhm.
absolutely critical these days. That's what we often refer to as that single and holistic version of the truth.
Ah, yes, the famous single version of the truth. But Gardner, they actually have a pretty good definition too, right?
They do. They really hit the nail on the head when they talk about MDM helping organizations that are struggling with data spread across all these different, applications, databases, different lines of business. That's a very common problem.
And MDM has come a long way, hasn't it? It's not exactly a brand new concept.
No, not at all. In fact, one of the books we're looking at, it had its first edition back in 2007, if you can believe it. But it's interesting because while the core idea has been around for a while, the way we approach MDM, the technology, and the best practices, all of that has matured significantly. It's really become a cornerstone of modern data strategy.
So it's safe to say this isn't just some passing fad.
Definitely not. In fact, you could argue that MDM is more relevant now than ever before. It's one of the fastest growing areas in IT.
Okay, so we know MDM is important and it's evolving. What are some of the biggest advancements we've seen in recent years?
Well, for one thing, we're seeing a lot more multi-domain MDM systems being built. So instead of just managing customer data or product data in isolation, we're seeing organizations take a more holistic approach, bringing all these different types of master data together under one umbrella.
Makes sense, right? It's all connected anyway.
Exactly. And the way we model that master data has also become a lot more sophisticated. Really understanding the relationships between different entities like customers, products, locations, all of that has gotten much more advanced.
So data modeling, that's a whole deep dive on its own. But how about the business side of things? Are organizations getting better at making the case for MDM?
I think so. Back in the day, it was often a tough sell, but now I think there's a much clearer understanding of the value proposition. We've also seen a lot of progress in the way we develop business cases for MDM, really tying it back to concrete business outcomes and showing that ROI. And then, of course, there's the whole relationship between MDM and data governance, which is absolutely critical.
Data governance, that's making sure everyone's playing by the same rules when it comes to data, right?
Yeah, exactly. Defining those policies, procedures, roles, and responsibilities. It's like the foundation for good MDM. And even the underlying architecture, the technical blueprints have evolved a lot. Things like service-oriented architecture, cloud-based MDM solutions, all of that is changing the game.
Okay, so we've got a good handle on what MDM is and how it's evolved, but let's talk about the why. Why is it such a big deal right now?
Well, I think there are several key drivers. First and foremost, it's the sheer volume and complexity of data that organizations are dealing with these days. It's exploding. And traditional approaches to managing data, they're just not cutting it anymore.
Like trying to keep up using just spreadsheets and file shares.
Right. Or even with, basic data governance initiatives. They're often too slow and too siloed to keep pace with the speed of business today. And that leads to a lot of problems. You end up with inconsistent data, duplicate records, data quality issues. It's a mess.
Yeah, and if you can't trust your data, how can you make good decisions?
Exactly. And in today's digital environment where everything is moving so fast, you need access to information that is not only available, but also reliable, accurate, and complete. You need to be able to trust your data to make the right calls, to be agile, to respond to market changes, to understand your customers, all of that.
So MDM is really about enabling that agility and
Yeah.
ability to make quick, informed decisions based on data you can trust.
Absolutely. And that need for reliable data, it spans across all aspects of the business, from understanding your overall business performance and, tracking those key metrics to having a clear view of your customers, your products, your suppliers. It all comes back to data.
Okay, so let's say you're leading the charge for MDM at
Yeah.
your company. You're convinced it's the right move.
Hmm.
What are some of the biggest hurdles you might face?
Well, you're going to run into challenges on both the organizational and the technical fronts. On the organizational side, it's often about getting everyone on the same page. Different departments might have their own ways of doing things, their own data silos, their own priorities.
Yeah, I can imagine that being a tough conversation. Hey, you need to give up control of your data and let's all manage it together.
Exactly. There can be a lot of resistance to that, people feeling like they're losing ownership of their data. And that can definitely slow things down. But for truly critical data, that single agreed upon view, it's absolutely essential.
So how do you overcome that resistance? How do you get everyone rowing in the same direction?
Well, strong leadership is key. You need someone at the top who really understands the value of MDM and is willing to champion it across the organization. You also need to build a strong business case, clearly showing the benefits, not just for the IT department, but for the entire business.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about the technical side of things? What are some of the biggest technical challenges?
Well, for one thing, MDM implementations can be complex and time-consuming. Integrating data from multiple sources, cleaning it up, ensuring consistency, it's a lot of work. And then there's the whole data governance piece, which we talked about earlier. Getting that right is absolutely crucial, but it's not always easy.
Yeah, and you mentioned security earlier. That's got to be a huge consideration, right?
Absolutely. Especially with all the data privacy regulations these days, you need to make sure that your MDM system is secure, that you're protecting sensitive data, and that you're compliant with all the relevant regulations. That can be a real challenge, especially when you're dealing with data from multiple sources.
So even if you have the best intentions and the budget for MDM, there are still a lot of potential pitfalls.
Definitely. It's not a magic bullet. And without strong leadership, a well-defined plan, and, the right technical expertise, MDM implementations can definitely go off the rails.
All right, let's assume an organization is ready to take on the MDM challenge. What are some of the key architectural considerations? What are the building blocks of a good MDM system?
So, first and foremost, it's important to understand that MDM isn't just a technology problem. It's a business problem that requires a technology solution.
Meaning, you can't just buy some software and call it a day.
Exactly. You need to think about the processes, the people, the data, the technology. It's a holistic endeavor. And that's why having a solid architectural approach is so crucial. You need a plan, a blueprint for how everything is going to fit together.
Okay, so what are some of the key elements of that blueprint?
Well, we often talk about MDM in the context of a broader enterprise architecture, which is, the overall structure of your IT systems. And you'll hear terms like ETL, which stands for extract, transform, load. That's the process of taking data from different sources, cleaning it up, transforming it, and loading it into a central repository.
So getting all your data into one place.
Right. And then there are enterprise data warehouses, or EDWs, which are those central repositories. They're designed to store large volumes of data from multiple sources and make it available for reporting and analysis. And MDM often plays a role in feeding data into those EDWs or consuming data from them.
Okay, but where does MDM itself actually live in this architecture?
Well, you'll often hear the term data hub, which is essentially the core of an MDM implementation. It's where you store and manage that master data along with metadata, which describes the data and where it came from.
So the data hub, that's like the central command center for MDM.
Yeah, you could think of it that way. It's the single source of truth, the system of record for your master data, and it needs to be designed in a way that allows it to integrate with other systems, both upstream and downstream.
And you mentioned service-oriented architecture earlier. How does SOA fit into the MDM picture?
So SOA is all about designing systems in a modular way where different functionalities are exposed as reusable services. And that's really important for MDM because it allows the data hub to easily share master data with other systems without having to build custom integrations for each one.
So it's like a plug-and-play approach to data sharing.
Exactly. And that makes the whole system much more flexible and scalable.
Okay, but it's not all about the data hub, right?
Mhm.
There are different architectural approaches to MDM.
Right. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. You'll hear terms like registry style, where the data hub basically just holds pointers to data in other systems, or reconciliation engine, which is more about, comparing and merging data from different sources. And then there's transaction data hub, which is more of a real-time system that actually processes transactions involving master data.
So choosing the right architectural style, that's a big decision.
Absolutely. It depends on your specific needs, your budget, the complexity of your data, all of that. And in reality, a lot of MDM implementations end up being a hybrid of these different styles.
Okay, so let's talk about data governance again. It
Yeah.
seems like that's a recurring theme. Why is data governance so critical for MDM?
It's absolutely essential. We often talk about MDM as being about technology, but really it's about people and processes just as much as technology. And data governance is what ensures that everyone is on the same page, that we're all speaking the same language when it comes to data.
So it's like the rule book for how we manage data.
Exactly. It defines the policies, the procedures, the roles, the responsibilities, who's accountable for what data, what are the quality standards, how do we handle changes. All of that needs to be clearly defined and enforced.
So it's not just about having a data hub, it's about having the right processes and the right people in place to manage that data effectively.
Right. And that's where data governance comes in. It provides that framework, that structure that ensures that your MDM system is actually going to deliver value.
Okay, so we've got this data hub, we've got our data governance framework in place. How does the data hub actually work? What are the key functions?
Well, one of the most important things a data hub needs to be able to do is handle both batch processing, where you're dealing with large volumes of data at scheduled intervals, and real-time processing, where you need to update and synchronize data almost instantaneously.
So it needs to be able to handle both the big picture and the minute details.
Exactly. And it needs to be able to ingest data from a variety of sources, internal and external, and then cleanse, standardize, and match that data to create that single version of the truth. And that often involves applying business rules, logic that defines how data should be handled, how duplicates should be identified, all of that.
Okay, so the data hub takes in all this raw data, cleans it up, and spits out a consistent, reliable view.
Yeah, that's the basic idea. And then it needs to be able to share that master data with other systems, either through direct integration or through some kind of data virtualization layer.
So it's like a central hub distributing data to all the spokes in the wheel.
Right. And the way that data is delivered, it might be real time, it might be batched. It really depends on the needs of the consuming system.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that customer data integration, or CDI, is a really big focus area within MDM. Why is that?
Well, for a lot of businesses, customer data is their most valuable asset. It's what allows them to understand their customers, to personalize their offerings, to improve their marketing campaigns, to provide better customer service, all of that.
So knowing your customer is key.
Absolutely. And that's where CDI comes in. It's about creating that single 360-degree view of the customer, bringing together data from all the different touch points, sales, marketing, customer service, social media, you name it.
And the goal is to be able to treat each customer as an individual, to understand their unique needs and preferences.
Right. and to be able to offer them the most relevant products and services, to tailor their experience, to anticipate their needs. That's what customer centricity is all about.
And MDM is a key enabler of that.
Absolutely. Without good MDM, you can't really achieve true customer centricity. You're always going to be operating with an incomplete view of the customer.
Okay, so CDI is about people. But what about all the other entities that businesses need to manage, like products, locations, assets? How does MDM handle that?
So that's where hierarchy management comes in. Think about an organizational chart, a product catalog, a location hierarchy. All of these have a hierarchical structure, and an effective NDM system needs to be able to manage those hierarchies, to understand the relationships between different entities.
So if you add a new product, the MDM system knows where it fits in the overall product catalog.
Exactly. And it can also handle changes to those hierarchies. So if you restructure your organization or you introduce a new product category, the MDM system can adapt.
And what about product data specifically? That can be pretty complex, can't it?
It can be. Products can have hundreds or even thousands of attributes, and managing all of that data consistently across the organization can be a real challenge. And that's why we often talk about a semantic approach to product data management, where we're not just storing data, but we're also capturing the meaning of that data.
So it's not just about knowing that a product has a certain color, but it's about understanding what that color means in the context of your business.
Right. And that allows you to do things like cross-selling and upselling more effectively because you can identify products that are similar or complementary based on their attributes.
Okay, so we've talked about data governance, we've talked about data modeling, we've talked about different architectural styles. What are some of the specific technologies and tools that are used to implement MDM?
Well, there are a lot of different MDM solutions out there, both commercial and open source, and they vary in terms of their capabilities, their complexity, their cost, all of that. But one of the most widely used MDM solutions is SAP MDG.
SAP MDG, that's SAP's take on master data management.
Exactly. And it's a very comprehensive solution covering a wide range of master data domains, including customer, product, supplier, finance, you name it. And it integrates seamlessly with other SAP systems, which is a big advantage for organizations that are already heavily invested in the SAP ecosystem.
So if you're running SAP, MDG is a natural choice.
It often is. But even for organizations that aren't running SAP, MDG can still be a viable option because it's a very powerful and flexible solution.
Okay, so what are some of the key features of SAP MDG?
Well, first of all, it's built on a service-oriented architecture, which we talked about earlier. That means it can easily share master data with other systems. It also has a very robust data modeling framework, which allows you to define your master data structures in a very granular way. And it has built-in support for data governance, so you can define your policies and workflows for how data is managed.
And it comes with predefined data models for common business objects.
Yes, it does. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can use the predefined models for things like customer, product, supplier, or you can customize them to fit your specific needs.
So it's kind of a best of both worlds situation.
Yeah, exactly. You get the flexibility to customize, but you also get a head start with pre-built content. And SCP MDG also has a lot of really powerful features for things like data quality management, data validation, duplicate check, data cleansing, all of that.
So it's not just about storing data, it's about making sure the data is accurate and reliable.
Right. And that's crucial for any MDM solution. If you can't trust your data, the whole system is useless.
Okay, so let's talk about how SAP MDG is actually implemented. What are the different deployment options?
Well, one common approach is a central hub deployment, where you have a dedicated SAP MDG system that acts as the central repository for all your master data. And then that data is replicated out to other SAP systems, like your ERP system or your CRM system.
So MDG becomes the single source of truth.
Exactly. And that's the ideal scenario for a lot of organizations because it gives you that centralized control over your master data.
But there are other options, right?
Yeah, you can also co-deploy MDG, which means you install it within an existing SAP system, like your ERP system. And that can be a good option for smaller organizations or for organizations that are just getting started with MDM.
So it's like a more lightweight approach.
In a way, yes, but it still gives you a lot of the same functionality as the central hub deployment.
Okay, so let's talk about how data is actually managed within SAP MDG. What's the process for creating or changing master data?
So MDG uses a change request-based approach. That means that whenever you want to create a new master data record or make changes to an existing one, you have to create a change request.
It's like a formal process for controlling changes.
Right. And those change requests, they go through a workflow process where they're reviewed, approved, validated, all of that. And you can configure those workflows to match your specific business processes.
So you can build in checks and balances to make sure that only authorized changes are made.
Exactly. And that's a really important aspect of data governance. You want to make sure that you have control over who can make changes to your master data and how those changes are made.
And what about things like data quality checks and validation?
Yeah, SAP MDG has a lot of built-in functionality for that. You can define validation rules, you can use duplicate check functionalities, you can even integrate with external data quality tools. So you can really make sure that your master data is clean and consistent.
So it's not just about capturing data, it's about ensuring that data is high quality.
Absolutely. And that's a key differentiator for a lot of NDM solutions. It's not enough to just have a central repository for your data. You need to make sure that data is accurate and reliable.
Okay, so let's talk about data security. When you're centralizing all this critical data, security has to be a top priority, right?
Absolutely. And SAP MDG takes security very seriously. It has a multi-layered security approach with features for authentication, authorization, data encryption, all of that.
So it's about protecting the data, both in transit and at rest.
Right. And it's also about making sure that only authorized users have access to the data and that they can only perform the actions that they're allowed to perform.
So role-based access control, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And SAP MDG integrates with SAP's identity management solution, so you can manage user access and permissions in a centralized way.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about what MDM is, why it's important, the challenges of implementing it, the architectural considerations, and the security aspects. But let's bring it back to the business. How do you justify the investment in MDM? How do you build a compelling business case?
Well, I think the key is to really understand the benefits of MDM and how they translate into tangible business value. We talked earlier about improved data quality, increased efficiency, better customer service, all of that. Those are real benefits that can have a significant impact on your bottom line.
So it's not just an IT project, it's a business initiative.
Exactly. And you need to be able to articulate those business benefits to your stakeholders to show them how MDM is going to help them achieve their goals.
And there are different ways to measure that value.
Yeah, absolutely. You can look at traditional financial metrics like ROI and NTV, but you can also look at things like improved customer satisfaction, increased revenue, reduced risk, all of those things.
So it's about taking a holistic view of the value that MDM can deliver.
Right. And that's where a well-defined MDM roadmap can be really helpful. It allows you to lay out the different phases of the implementation, the costs associated with each phase, and the benefits that you expect to realize.
So you can show your stakeholders a clear path to value.
Exactly. And that makes it much easier to get buy-in and secure the funding you need.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into MDM. For our listeners who are thinking about embarking on their own MDM journey, what are your top recommendations?
I think the most important thing is to really understand your business needs and your data challenges. Don't just jump into an MDM implementation because it's a trendy thing to do. Take the time to assess your current state, define your goals, and develop a clear roadmap. And don't underestimate the importance of data governance. It's the foundation for successful MDM.
Great advice. And SAP MDG, that's a powerful tool for organizations that are looking to implement MDM, especially if they're already using SAP.
It is. But regardless of the specific technology you choose, the key is to approach MDM strategically with a clean understanding of the business value it can deliver.
Excellent. Thanks so much for guiding us through this deep dive. For our listeners, we hope you found this conversation insightful and helpful. As we wrap up, here's something to ponder. In today's rapidly evolving digital landscape, where data is becoming increasingly important, can organizations really afford to ignore MDM? We encourage you to revisit the sources we've discussed today and to continue exploring this fascinating and critical topic.
Absolutely. Data is the lifeblood of any modern organization, and mastering that data is essential for success. MDM is a journey, but it's a journey worth taking.
Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.